At CES this year we saw the launch of Thermaltake CTE range of cases and fans. This is the CTE C750 Air, the largest in that family. It's dual chamber, supports E80X, and can support multiple radiators and stacks of fans and drives. Basically it can do anything you want, and this raises a few questions. Does it actually flow as much air as all this perforation suggests? Do you need an enormous case in your life? And why exactly is the government on the phone?
This is a test of emergency alerts, a new UK government service that will warn you if there's a life-threatening emergency nearby.
In other words, you're not to be concerned about the Thermaltake. That's not the problem here. It's just everything else going on in the world. The CTE C750 Air is large. Best move is for me to remove the panels, and you can see what's going on and we can discuss the specification. Off with the main glass panel, 2 pop pins, rocks out. I can leave it alone, it's not going to fall. Lift and away, nice and simple. So 4mm glass, lightly tinted. Top panel, also on 4 pop pins, lots of ventilation. Under that we have a full-length dust filter, and the I/O panel is on the top. Front panel also pops on, also 4 pop pins. Behind that, a full-length dust filter. You'll notice no tools required so far. Same story with the right-hand panel. We've got 2 filters, one for either intake or exhaust for a radiator or for fans, one for the power supply which sits in the rear chamber. And when we go to the bottom, we have a dust filter. Again, the bottom you can mount radiator or fans either for intake or exhaust, probably for intake. And now you can see that we have an updraft design. So the front and the back are both intake or exhaust, most likely intake. In fact, let me show you the back. Another pop-on full-length panel with a dust filter. So fully filtered all round, and now you can see clearly we have 3 CT140 fans, one at the front in intake, one at the rear in intake, one in the roof in exhaust. So let's take a look at what the CTE form factor is. Centralized thermal efficiency, a grand way of saying they've rotated the motherboard 90 degrees and have an updraft airflow pattern. Clearly this means that the rear I/O panel is in the roof of the case. It also means that the front I/O panel is next to the rear I/O panel. The 3 CT140 fans are PWM controlled, have no RGB, and run from 500 RPM up to 1500 RPM, and also leave a huge amount of space inside the case. Depending on what kind of cooler you're using, obviously if you have an AIO that will also come with fans, but you're probably going to need more fans. This is a very large case. It supports up to 7 3.5-inch hard drives or 12 2.5-inch SSDs, and you have the option, should you wish, of rotating the PCIe slots so you can hang your graphics card. On the other hand, you don't get a PCI Express riser with this bracket, so that's going to add some expense. There's a pump reservoir mount at the front of the case, but the mounting holes appear to be ideally suited to Thermaltake's own Pacific pump reservoir units. When it comes to installation of cooling, in the front we can install 3 120 or 140 fans or 2 200s. In the roof we can put in 2 120s or 140s alongside the rear I/O panel of the case. In the floor of the case we can install 3 120s or 140s. In the rear of the case, just as with the front, 3 120s or 140s or 2 200s, and in the side of the case beside the motherboard we can install 3 120s or 140s. This means when it comes to AIO cooling we have a huge number of options, but realistically you're only going to install a single AIO cooler in your case, generally for the CPU. There are some AIO arrangements for cooling graphics, but they are few and far between. Custom loop cooling, the options are pretty much the same as AIO cooling, and here's a breakdown of the fan support list. Up to 14 120 or 140 fans, or 4 200s, plus some more fans for the other positions. And also a breakdown of all-in-one versus custom loop cooling. As we've pointed out in various reviews in the past, you want to approach these sorts of lists with caution. It very much depends on the exact cooler you're using, and in particular the exact shape and thickness of radiator. So let's see what that looks like in practice. You can see a decent RGB show at the front of the case, and if you look very closely you'll see RGB at the back and also in the side. What on earth's going on there? The answer is we've opened up the side position first by removing the front cover and filter, and then popping off the front panel, removing the front radiator fan rack, and then we remove the drive mount plate from the side position, and then we've installed some fans in the side. So now we have fans in the front, side and back. Look even more closely and you'll spot the two 360mm radiators in the front and the back. There's a lot going on here. Also, worth noting, it can get quite noisy. And now we can take a closer look at this side plate that I mentioned, which is where you can mount various drives. Drives can also be installed in the floor of the case. Now that we're getting more up close and personal with this case, we can see there are no specific drive bays. There are instead drive mount locations. Lots of them, but the format is slightly unusual. I also mentioned in that little bit of B-roll that we have radiator fan racks, which I have not previously mentioned. So let's take a look at those. In the floor of the case, you can see I've taken the three CT140 fans from the front, top and back, and I've installed them in the bottom. On the other hand, if you wanted, you could put 120 fans there, or indeed hard drives. Access to 4 screws, 2 at the bottom, 2 at the top. Three 120 fans with a 360 radiator. The side positions are fixed, so the 3 fans are installed, but we have plenty of access once we go around the back. Same deal with the rear fan rack as the front, so once we've got the cover off along with its filter, 4 screws. Another 360 radiator with 3 120 fans. And you may not have noticed, I've also got a 240 radiator up in the roof of the case, albeit without any fans. This is a truly enormous case that can accommodate a vast amount of hardware. I mentioned rotating the PCI Express expansion slot bracket and also waved this bracket around. Before I put the motherboard in place, let's show you what on earth I'm talking about. Air-cooled graphics card, by default, hangs like that. So here we have the expansion slots, and now we can rotate it 90 degrees, which means it's like thus. We can't just hang the graphics card from this piece of tin because there's no support for the hardware, and this is quite a lot of weight. So we can attach this bracket to allow for the exact position of the graphics card, space it nearer or further away from the glass panel, and then the idea is that the graphics card hangs from the expansion slots and you route a PCI Express cable through those mounts there and all is good. That's fine, quite frankly. It means that you end up having added the ironmongery with your graphics card hanging on show in the window rather than hanging like so, you're looking at the edge of it. The tinware wouldn't have cost a huge amount of money, although it's quite a substantial bracket, quite rightly so. As I say, heavy and expensive hardware, but you do also need a riser cable, and that is going to be quite expensive. They're 40 or 50 pounds, dollars still. That's the bracket installed on the side of the PCI Express slots in approximately the correct position. And now we have the graphics card hanging from the bracket and taking pride of place inside the main compartment of the CTE C750 Air. No doubt you're wondering why I'm showing you an air-cooled graphics card in this case, having demonstrated just how much liquid cooling you can install. So I'll show you exactly why. Let's take this Palette RTX 3080 Gaming Pro, strip off the back plate and the original cooler, and we reveal the bare PCB. Then we install an EK Quantum Vector CPU block, full nickel, and an EK Quantum Vector active backplate. With all that hardware installed, we're ready to put the graphics card in the case. And while it looks absolutely super, you have to strain your eyes to even find it inside such a large case. Look closely and you'll see it does indeed look superb. However, it has no part in this enormous Thermaltake. While liquid cooling on both your CPU and GPU may sound like the way forward, in this instance we're going to stick with air cooling for our graphics card. Our test PC has 3 Thermaltake ToughFan 12 RGBs at the back and 3 of the same ToughFan 12 RGBs at the front. An EK Coolstream SE240 radiator is installed in the roof of the case, and mounted on that we have 2 Be Quiet Lightwings 120mm PWM fans. The pump reservoir unit is an EK Quantum Kinetic TBE for tube 300mm with a D5 pump. The CPU is an AMD Ryzen 9 7950X. And the SSD is a Sabrent Rocket 4.0 M.2. Apply some thermal compound to our AMD CPU, its Arctic MX4, and then we install the EK Quantum Magnitude CPU block. We note the 32GB of G.Skill Trident Z RGB DDR5 6000 memory, and we admire the Asus ROG Crosshair X670E Hero motherboard. The graphics card is a Gigabyte GeForce RTX 4080 16GB gaming OC, and the Thermaltake ToughPower GF3 1200W gold power supply sits in the right hand compartment along with a load of cables and the 2 control units for those Thermaltake RGB fans. Install the right hand panel and the mess is completely covered. The PC is complete and it's running. I've gone with soft tube. I've used this EK Cryofuel solid white coolant, and I've used some Fantex fittings which are black with white O-rings. Look closely and you will see I swapped out the CPU block. Originally I showed you this EK Quantum Magnitude full nickel block. I've swapped it for the same EK Quantum Magnitude but with a plexi top. It's purely a visual thing. Functionally they're absolutely identical, but now we can see the white coolant passing through the block. We also have a significant amount of ARGB lighting. The fans at the front and the rear are controlled by Thermaltake's TT Plus RGB and fan control software, while the rest of the hardware is controlled by a Asus Armoury crate. Overall, I find it very visually appealing. It's worth discussing the practicalities of connecting mouse, keyboard, monitors and any other bits and pieces that might be connected to the PC by cables, because of course the rear I/O are on the top of the case under this top cover. How do you connect any cables that you need to hook up? You can see that the cables come out of the back of the case through a grommet just above the main power cord, but to get there you have to look under the top cover when they actually go then down the side of the case, through another cable grommet, through the external cable grommet and out to fresh air. It is somewhat fiddly, but the end result is at least neat and tidy. Of course it also means if you ever want to access any further ports on the rear I/O, you're going to have to lift this cover off and literally plug in. As to whether it's a temporary thing or a permanent connection, that's a different matter. Flash drives clearly will go in the front I/O panel connectors. It's also worth pointing out that the legends printed on the case next to those front I/O panel connectors are slightly off. We ran a combination of Cinebench R23 and TimeSpy stress test in 3 different configurations. First, we had the fans running at 50%, so the 3 case fans now in the floor of the case 800 RPM, the 6 120mm ARGB fans at 1000 RPM, and the 2 Be Quiet fans on the radiator running at 900 RPM, and it sounded like this. Then the 3 Thermaltake fans in the floor of the case were increased to full speed, a nominal 1500 RPM, actually they ran at 1600 RPM, and it sounded like this. And then for the final run, all the fans at 100%, so the 3 case fans in the floor at 1600 RPM, the 6 Thermaltake RGB fans at 2000, and the 2 Be Quiets at 1700 RPM. And what did this do for temperatures? I must confess I was surprised to see the fan speed made no difference to thermals whatsoever, which tells us 2 things. Firstly, that a Ryzen 9 7950X that's pegged at full load runs very hot at 95 Celsius. It's pulling just over 200 watts. And secondly, our RTX 4080 gaming OC from Gigabyte was sitting at a chilly 65 Celsius and breathing very happily regardless of what the fans around it were doing. This is a huge case and it flows air very well. And just as a double check, we can look back to my recent temperature testing when I did AMD's Ryzen 9 and Ryzen 7 3D processors, and we can see this same Ryzen 9 7950X at the very top of the temperature chart at 95 Celsius, in that instance cooled by a Corsair 360mm AIO. I must confess I'm slightly disappointed that this 240mm custom loop couldn't do slightly better than the Corsair AIO, but the facts are the facts. 95 Celsius under load is what you get. The fans can be run low and slow in this enormous high airflow case, and it works just as well as turning the fans up to loud. And as I finally move to wrap up this video, let me touch on pricing. We've been told by Thermaltake that the black version in this case will be £169 here in the UK and the white will be £189. I'm taking it that's going to be plus VAT, so we're talking north of 200 and south of 250. Fairly expensive, and yet you do undeniably get quite a lot of hardware for your money. Let us dive into Leo's pros and cons about the Thermaltake CTE C750 Air. Pros, the good points. Massive airflow, undeniably so. Frankly, the thermals in this, it's almost like an open test bench. You have loads of options for liquid cooling. You've got radiator fan racks in the front, back and bottom. They've done a good job there, and that's going to make installation of the hardware considerably easier. Fully filtered panels, by which I mean every panel has a filter. They are all over the place. This is a good thing and I thoroughly approve. And you have loads of USB ports on the top I/O panel. Obviously your motherboard needs to support all the connectors, but given that you don't have access to the rear I/O, or effectively don't, this front I/O or top I/O is of critical importance, and they've done a good job there. Cons, the negative points. The CTE C750 is very large and the built PC is heavy. I've moved it around a lot making this video and it just gets heavier and heavier. I don't think this is a PC you're going to put on your desk unless it's a really substantial desk. It's going to go under your desk. There can't be a lot of argument there. Once it's in place, I don't think it's going to move around a lot. The CT140 case fans can get rather noisy. If you run them above 1000 RPM, in fact above 800 RPM, yeah, noisy fans. And that's a bit of a disappointment because they're brand new and Thermaltake told us good things about those fans. The vertical airflow makes external cable connection somewhat awkward. We expected it, it's true, it's just a fact of life. Finally, logos on components will be rotated 90 degrees. Your graphics card hangs vertically. If you're using a water block on your CPU or an AIO, that's going to be rotated. Memory actually comes out of this okay, happily, but various other components, they don't quite look right. Again, rotate things, and that's just the price you have to pay. Overall, I'm giving it 8.5 out of 10 and a worth buying. It's clearly not for everybody, but it certainly has a number of good points. There we have it, Thermaltake's CTE C750 Air.